Hello, readers, and welcome back to Reading in the Middle, the podcast where we celebrate middle grade books, the creators behind them, and the stories that stay with us long after we finish reading the final page. I'm your host, Anisha Jeffries. Today's episode is a special one because I'm joined by two incredible collaborators, Diane Debrovner and Stacy Cervenka, to talk about their thoughtful and emotional layered new middle grade novel, Roxie in Color, which releases June 2nd. This is one of those books that quietly settles into your heart. At the center of the story is Roxie Glass, a 7th grader starting over at a new school and hoping this time she can finally control how people see her. Roxie loves painting because, as she says in the opening pages, you can always paint over mistakes. Real life, though, is a little more complicated. As Roxie navigates friendship, middle school, social dynamics, art, anxiety, and questions about identity, she's also carrying a secret she worries that could change everything. Both her parents are blind. The novel explores disability, belonging, visibility, and self-worth with so much honesty and care, and I especially loved how color becomes its own emotional language throughout the story. We also talk about Nash, Roxie's lovable yellow lab guide dog, whose chapters completely stole my heart. His perspective adds warmth, humor, and such a unique emotional lens to the novel. And one detail I really appreciate as a reader and librarian is that the novel is typeset in Atkinson Hyperlegible. Hope I'm saying that right. That's a font developed by the Braille Institute specifically for low vision readers. It's a reminder that accessibility is woven not only into the story itself, but into the physical reading experience. I actually had the opportunity to speak with Diane and Stacy last year while the book was still forthcoming. So if you hear references to next year during the conversation, that's why. This is such a thoughtful, wonderful discussion about collaboration, craft, disability, representation, and emotional power of art. So, settle in and let's get into my conversation with Diane and Stacy. Diane and Stacy, hi, welcome to Reading in the Middle. How are you both today?
We're doing great. Thank you so much for having us here.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
We had such a good time working on this book, and we are excited that it is finally coming into the world.
Me too. I can't wait for our listeners to get it. I know it comes out next year, and I know they're on the seat of their pants, and I just can't wait. But I wanted to talk to you about how both of you were able to come together to collaborate on such a wonderful book.
Well, in 2018, Diane was the deputy editor of Parents Magazine, and she wrote a cover story called What Blind Parents Want Us to See. And in the course of her extensive research for the article, she interviewed about a dozen blind parents, including my husband and myself. At the time, I was serving as the chairperson of the Blind Parents Group of the National Federation of the Blind. And so she got to know the blind parent community and some of the issues that we and our families face. And we kept in touch. And Diane knew that I was heavily involved in the blind parent community and also had done some freelance writing for U.S. News Report and the Omaha Daily Record and the Omaha World Herald. And she, developed sort of the, preliminary draft of a middle grade novel about a girl who had blind parents. And she asked me if I'd be interested in collaborating with her on it to bring it into the world.
Nice.
When I spoke to all of those parents, everyone had their own unique experience, but I heard so many similar stories about how they had been judged unfairly and the truths that they wished sighted parents understood about them and their families. And those conversations really planted the first seeds for the book. I'd spent so many years at the magazine editing articles about child development and behavior and why kids of different ages do what they do and feel how they feel. And so I started automatically thinking about, oh, what would it be like to be a 12-year-old with blind parents? And there were so many possibilities for interesting, relatable situations that felt like a middle grade novel. And once the story grabbed a hold of me, I was not able to let it go. And I was just thrilled when Stacy agreed to work on it with me.
Yeah, I enjoyed it so much where I was so happy when I first got the book. And then I was able to read about how you both were joined or connected by the book. So it is just a wonderful read, and it does capture some wonderful moments that I feel that someone like myself, I would not be able to understand, but through Roxie's world, I can and be able to understand her journey. And Diane, I wanted to ask you, when the novel opens up, Roxie is saying that the best part about painting on your wall is that as soon as it dries, you can paint right over it. If only the same were true about school. And that line feels like the emotional thesis of the book. Did that sentence come early in the writing process, or did it emerge once you understood Roxie's world?
It did come relatively early in the writing process. We appreciated the parallels between her art and getting her emotions out through her painting and the way she felt about the way people were perceiving her pretty early on in the process. And those themes continued to overlap. And so that felt like the right way to start the story.
Yeah, and I was drawn. The cover is just so gorgeous. It says Roxie in color, and I love colors anyway. And the illustration and all that is just really eye-catching. And I want to ask you, Stacy, that right after Roxie imagines becoming a brand new blend of colors, not some stick figure drawn out with a black Sharpie by people who don't really know her. How important was it for you that readers immediately understood her desire to control how she's seen?
I think that's a very important part of the book, and it's something that we can all relate to, how often we might initially see each other as stereotypes, or we might see each other and notice that we dress a certain way, or we talk a certain way, or we live in a certain part of town, or we come from a certain family or culture, and right away people think they know us and they know how we're going to be, and that we want people to see us as fully fleshed out human beings. So for all her life, Roxie feels like she's been known as the girl with blind parents. And, she talks in the book about some of the assumptions they make about her. Like they assume that because she has blind parents, she's going to be an angel all the time. She's going to be good all the time, or that her life is going to be, very difficult or underprivileged. And so they kind of have this idea about her without really getting to know her first. All they know about her is that she has blind parents, and she wants to be seen for who she is. And I think she also wants her family to be seen for who they really are as well.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because there's a moment, Stacy, where Roxie explains that her parents hate being called amazing for doing ordinary things like cooking or taking the train. Why is it important to put that frustration explicitly on the page?
I think one thing about being called amazing is it kind of almost others and dehumanizes people, even if people don't realize that they're doing that. In the disability community, we have this phrase that you may have heard called inspiration porn. And it's basically looking at somebody for your own gratification. But you're looking at them and you're thinking, wow, their life is so much harder than mine. At least I'm not them. Or my life is, look at them and their difficult life. At least look at all I have. So you're looking at them and you're not really humanizing them. You're using them to inspire yourself or to gratify yourself. And so Roxie's parents don't want to be seen as, wow, you're amazing, you're superhuman, you're I could never do that. It's, being blind or having a disability is a very human experience. And her parents just want to be seen as human. And they're just doing what humans do when they're blind.
I think another aspect of it is that we acknowledge the fact that it's really hard for people who are sighted to understand what it's like to be blind, because we've never been blind before. They make the point, Roxie's parents make the point that being blind is not the same as being a sighted person and putting on a blindfold and all of a sudden not being able to see. And that people who are blind have spent many years, if not their entire lifetime, navigating the world without sight, and they know how to do all the things that they need to do in their life. But people who haven't walked in their shoes don't understand that. And so it might seem amazing that, wow, you can get dressed even though you can't see each other. To them, of course, it's not amazing. That said, I will add that I think the inspiring part of getting to know Roxie's family and people who are blind is that they're finding creative solutions to everyday problems every day, all the time. And it's not that it's amazing, it's just strategic and creative, because the world was not designed for blind people, and yet they live in it very successfully every day. And I think it can remind us all that we need to be patient and look for solutions to problems when they cross our path.
Absolutely. I think that's a really good point, Diane. There are blind people that I think are inspiring. Like, wow, the creativity you use to figure out that problem, or the fact that you kept going even when you experienced misperceptions or you experienced discrimination. I'm inspired that, some of the older people who are blind that I've met who, were very successful at a time when many, many doors were closed to them. Being inspired by someone is not in and of itself a bad thing, as long as you're, not dehumanizing them, I guess.
Yeah, and you mentioned inspiring. I would say that's a better word to frame it than amazing, being inspired, because that's a little bit like you mentioned, being inspired by someone doesn't have to mean like you're pitying them or you're feeling sorry for anyone.
Exactly.
No. And Diane, that moment when her parents don't like the word amazing, that moment isn't framed as just a lesson. It exists. It just exists. How conscious were you of trusting middle grade readers to recognize what's wrong there without explaining it?
I think that Roxie is able to see the world from the perspective of both a typical sighted child and also someone who understands what it's like to navigate the world as a blind person. So she really walks in between the two worlds and hopefully can put it in the proper context for a middle grade reader so that they understand both sides of it.
Now, I also want to mention, Diane, structurally, giving Nash his own chapters is a bold choice. In chapter 2, he calls himself a dog with a purpose. I love that. And explains the difference between being a working dog and a home dog. What did Nash allow you to do narratively that Roxie's voice alone couldn't?
It's always nice to be able to have a different perspective on your protagonist and let us see her through the eyes of somebody else. In this case, Nash had a very interesting, unique perspective on Roxie and on the people in his family. And it also allowed us to see scenes where Roxie was not. So we could see what things were like with her mom during the course of her day when she was alone with Nash, when Roxie wasn't there. And some of those scenes, I think, were very helpful to explain the bigger picture to the reader. And I also think kids love dogs, and I love dogs, and it gives us a little opportunity for some levity and humor in his chapters.
I think it's clever.
And I think it also, Roxie is 12. She's in 7th grade. And so there are some ways that she sees the world that are very typical of how a 12-year-old might see the world. One might sometimes call it overdramatic, or, like when she's in the restaurant and she assumes that the people in the restaurant, the hostess, questions whether mom can bring her guide dog into the restaurant. She assumes that the people behind her are judging the family and are like, why doesn't their family just eat somewhere else? Where really the family is judging the hostess and like, doesn't everybody know about guide dogs by now? So I think Nash kind of is almost a neutral or sort of different lens to see situations. So Roxie sees the world in one way, like, oh my gosh, we're different. Everyone is looking at us and they're thinking negative things, or mom and dad are so embarrassing, where Nash looks at the world in a different way.
Right. Because they rely on Nash, right? So he has a responsibility. And this is questions for you, Stacy. With Nash's narration, then it relies on smell, sound, routine, and physical proximity, especially in the line where Roxie says their eyes leash together. How did lived experience shape the sensory language in those chapters?
Well, in this case, when Nash says his eyes leash together with Roxie's, that's kind of more of a, Nash is a dog, so he's using his doggy frame of reference. Our eyes leash together, our eyes connect. So in that sense, when we thought about Nash, we wanted to think about how would a dog view this. We talk about Nash feeling very waggy, Nash feeling very barky. So instead of saying I'm excited or I'm happy, Nash interprets it in his way. Because the book isn't written from the point of view of someone who's blind, the sensory details aren't necessarily too different, because Roxie and Nash can both see. Well, Nash can't see colors, as all dogs can't see colors. So that is something we sometimes had to remind ourselves. Like at one point we'd say, oh, Nash saw a red bird, or Nash says he sees a red bird. And we're like, wait, Nash can't see color. So we have to think of that. The story is generally, it's written from Roxie and Nash's perspective. So, there definitely is a rich visual. Roxie's very interested in color, and because she's an artist, who has a very visual medium. And so she thinks of her world in terms of color. When she's nervous, she says she rainbow walks, and with each step she takes, she mentions a color of the rainbow. So, for me as a sighted person, that actually, that is different. So when I was writing the chapter where Roxie's family was going through Penn Station in New York, I had to look up detailed descriptions of Penn Station and what the murals are like and what the stained glass is like. And I had to go on the website and kind of look it up, because I'm not writing as a blind person in this chapter. I'm writing as Roxie. And Roxie's seeing all this stuff, and she takes out her phone and she takes a picture of it. So I had to kind of think in terms of what would Roxie as an artist notice about Penn Station.
So also in the there's a scene in the lunchroom, especially in this question's for Diane, excuse me. There's a moment when Quinn, one of the characters, says, sorry, the scene is saved, and it's devastating because of how restrained it is. How did you decide when to let silence and proximity do the emotional work?
We tried to imagine what the conversations really would be like in real life. And I think sometimes silence is the most awkward for kids to have to deal with. Even if Quinn says things that are a little bit rude, silence has a tendency to make kids feel awkward. And the question to her is, okay, do I say something else or do I just move on, right? So I think there's a balance between and talking. And certainly you can express your anxiety and your awkwardness through a style of talking and rambling on, but sometimes silence is just another way that it manifests itself.
And it's interesting, my favorite line in the book, which actually Diane wrote, which kind of deals with that, is, not giving too much away, but when mom and dad show up at Roxie's school, dad starts, corrects one of the girls who refers to mom's dog as a seeing eye dog and says, actually it's a guide dog. If you call it a seeing eye dog, it has to come from a certain school called the Seeing Eye. And then it's like everybody was silent. No one cares about dad's fun blind facts. And that always makes me laugh, because you can hear like the awkward silence and just like, oh God, Dad, shut up. Like, no one cares about your fun blind facts.
And Stacy, I want to ask you this second question about Quinn's behavior, because it often reads as like careless, rather intentionally cruel. mocking, tap dancing, laughing about Roxie's wall paintings? Why is it important to show how harm in middle school often comes with thoughtlessness and not villainy?
Yeah, I mean, I think that bullying that kids experience in middle school can come from a variety of places. In Quinn's case, I think it comes from a variety of places. Like she, as we went through the book, has her own, situation at home, where she has her own, concerns about her own parents. And so maybe at home, she doesn't always feel seen because her dad is often busy and her mom often has migraines. And so she might not be getting the attention that she wants and needs always at home. I mean, her parents are never shown as neglectful per se, but her dad works a lot and her mom experiences these debilitating headaches. And so at school, Quinn is Miss Popular and she's able to kind of get the attention from the other kids that she might not always get at home. And she really wants to keep that. It's really important to her. She wants to be seen as, she doesn't want anyone to feel sorry for her because of that. She doesn't want to be seen as, less than or anything. So, sometimes when we feel that way, we might inadvertently put others down or, especially at that age. So I think we were very careful to make sure that Quinn is not seen as, a villain, but maybe just sort of an antagonist who has her own stuff going on and has her own character arc, as most middle school kids are. I mean, middle school kids aren't bad. They're just dealing with heavy things sometimes and not always sure how to deal with them in a healthy way, which is the same for all of us.
And also, you have adults in the book that are encouraging, like Miss Williams. She pauses by Roxie's work in art class and says, you love to paint. It's one of the first moments where an adult truly sees her. Why did that moment need to stay small and understated?
Why was it small and understated? I don't think we wanted to emphasize the fact that Roxie felt bad that her parents couldn't see her art. I don't think that was a primary message that we were trying to get across. I think that in school, Roxie has been pigeonholed in a certain way in the past, and she's coming to a new school for the first time, and she's hoping that the school community will see her as a three-dimensional person, and art is very important to her. So when her teacher notices her as being someone in the class who may be particularly talented, I think just like all kids like to be appreciated for being good at something, it's very touching to Roxie, and she's excited because she thinks that's a good sign that things are going to go well in her new school. So yeah.
Well, also, I have to mention this, and I don't want to keep like I'm spoiling the book, but there's certain scenes in there where it's just really grabbed me. And to Stacy, the Uber scene where the driver refuses to take Nash, it appears briefly but carries enormous weight. Why was it important to include a barrier that's is systemic rather than personal?
Well, that is something that a lot of guide dog users face, and we wanted to show in the book, and I think we do a really good job of it, is that the primary barrier that many blind people will say they face is not the physicality of blindness itself, but often it's the misconceptions or the discrimination that exists. That a lot of ride-hailing service drivers will not want to take guide dogs. And so we wanted to show that is a common experience that guide dog users face. And to me, it was extremely important that we kind of show a lot of the systemic issues that blind people face, that blind parents face, that our families face. Systems are made up of people. It's not just an idea. It actually impacts her family. It actually might impact her family's ability to get to where they need to go.
Absolutely. And that's what I wanted to ask Diane. That scene isn't softened or it's not even explained. It simply happens. How intentional was that narrative restraint?
We didn't set out to write this book to teach kids lessons about, inclusion and accessibility primarily. Primarily, it's meant to be a story that's engaging and interesting. And it's because we hope that the readers will be interested in the characters and care about the characters, that all the other things that happen to them that may not be fair will be more palatable, right? And so we didn't want to be heavy-handed. We just wanted it to be part of her life and for her to talk about them as a reality for her.
And again, I think laws and systems are about people, and the best storytelling happens when you connect humanity to the systems and structures that shape everyday life and that touch our families and our safety and our sense of belonging. So, as someone who works in public policy, I know from a day-to-day basis that when we advocate for fair laws, surrounding employment of people with disabilities or, non-discrimination and rideshare, this has to do with the everyday situations that our families face.
And Stacy, I have another question because I want to pause for a moment and talk about the physical book itself. So Roxie in Color is typeset in Atkinson Hyperlegible. A font that's developed by the Braille Institute specifically for low vision readers. That's a choice many readers might not consciously notice, but it absolutely matters. How meaningful was it for you to see accessibility reflected, not just in the story, but in the design of the book itself?
Yes, that was incredibly important to me because when I wrote it, for me personally, and that's the interesting thing about having two authors write a book. And I think one thing that makes the book really well-rounded is that Diane, sometimes there were times when we thought of it from different perspectives. And when I wrote about it, I was not coming at it from the sighted gaze or from the non-disabled gaze. I was thinking, how is a blind person going to read this book? How is a blind child going to read this book? Can I, the organization I work for, we run youth programs. We run programs for blind adults. Can I give this to a blind teenager and feel good about it and feel that they're going to see themselves or their future in a realistic way? And so I wanted to make sure that the book would be available to blind and low vision people. I wrote it for blind people. I want them to see themselves. I want little blind kids to see themselves in mom and dad and in Lena. I want them to see competent blind adults. And so in order for that to happen, the book needs to be available to them. And so that's why we're so excited that the book is going to, the print version of the book, the version that you can buy in stores, is in Atkinson Hyperlegible, which is a font that was developed by the Braille Institute specifically to be as accessible as possible to people who are low vision. And, we're also working to make sure that there's going to be an audio version that'll be available in Braille so that everybody can read it. When I think about the book, I'm excited about it educating. I'm very excited about it educating teachers and librarians and sighted students. That's an incredibly important part. But I also look forward to blind kids reading it and maybe realizing for the first time, oh, that's what it looks like to be a blind parent. Because as we know, if you don't see yourself as an adult, it's hard to imagine it. If we don't experience something, it's hard to imagine it. And if you're a blind kid, I live in the Midwest. I work in Iowa. I live in Nebraska, very rural. Often blind kids are the only blind kid in their entire county. And if you don't see any other adults who function the way that you do, it's hard to imagine what is it going to be like to be a parent. Because I don't drive. So as a blind kid, I thought, man, what is it going to be like to be a parent? I'm not going to be able to drive a car. What's it going to be like for me? I'm not going to all of a sudden morph into a sighted person when I grow up. So I think for blind and low vision kids to see mom and dad as, successful, good parents, and to see Lena Banerjee as a cool, she's the YouTuber in the series or in the story. And, to see her as a cool 20-something blind person living her best life in LA. And so, of course, I want the book to be accessible to them.
Now, this question is for both of you. If the reader flips back to the first page after finishing Roxie in Color, what do you hope they notice differently from the second time through?
That's a great question. I do think that the way she sees the world as someone who notices color, as someone who is visually oriented and talented in that way, that we tried to bring that out as much in the story as possible. And certainly that impacts the plot later on when she is trying to decide if she's going to take a test to find out whether she is going to potentially inherit the condition that caused her mother's blindness, because she's a very visual person. And so we tried to weave in details that would make that even more of an emotionally heightened situation for her.
And I think people in some ways, the average reader of the book may not know much about blindness or blind people. And some of the things Roxie thinks at the beginning of the book, it's kind of almost implied that her parents don't know that she paints on her walls in the beginning, or that if Roxie, inherits her mom's RP, she won't be able to paint again. So there are things that are almost sort of like taken for granted maybe by a reader at the beginning of the book that change as the book goes on, and they realize mom and dad, of course they know that she paints on her bedroom walls. Who do you think buys this 12-year-old girl paint? And the brushes, they think mom and dad can tell the whole, half the house smells like paint. And so so I think some of the things when they read it a second time, also, Roxie is very worried about hurting mom and dad's feelings. Like, if mom and dad know that she sometimes feels self-conscious when she's with them, that'll hurt their feelings. And toward the end of the book, Roxie's mom says to her, Roxie, you don't have to protect us from your feelings. We're the adults. I mean, mom and dad are adults. They understand what Roxie's going through. And so I think maybe when they read it a second time around, they'll see some things that maybe they just took for granted as inevitable, or, and they'll see them as like Roxie pre-growth.
Yeah. And there are some surprises at the end of the book for both Roxie and Nash. And hopefully reading it through a second time, you won't be incredibly surprised by what happens as much as you may have been the first time. And there are some breadcrumbs along the way that prepare the reader for what might happen.
Yeah, I didn't want to spoil anything because I have some questions, but I'm not going to spoil it. So I'll just leave it at that. But I do want to ask both of you some rapid fire questions, because I usually do my guests. So I'll ask the question, and either both of you could take turns answering those questions. And it's just real short. So are you ready?
Yeah, as ready as we're going to be.
You can go first.
Oh, boy.
Okay. Butter pecan, coincidence or destiny?
Oof, coincidence.
Coincidence.
Nash, narrator or emotional anchor?
Ooh. I'm going to go in
public murals or bedroom walls?
I think the bedroom walls are more important to Roxie.
Agreed.
One word from the text that best describes Roxie by the end.
Empowered?
Open-minded.
All right.
Maybe even proud.
That's good. I like that too. Oh my goodness. Diane and Stacy, I want to thank you so much for being my guest on Reading in the Middle. Listeners, you're going to have to wait until next year. I'm sorry. You know what? Nope. Let me cut that out. I'm going to cut that out, because I'm going to be releasing this by the release date.
So June?
Yep. So June. So you can go and...
It comes out June 2nd.
June 2nd. Oh my gosh. That just sounds so far away. But yes, I will edit this and say that you can go and get a copy wherever your independent bookstore is, or wherever your neighborhood public library is located, to get Roxie in color. It's such a wonderful book, and it's amazing. And Roxie is such an empowering character, and there's laughs, and there's so much grace and beauty in this book. And I just want to thank you both for taking the time to talk about it.
Thank you so much for having us. Yeah.
We're so glad you enjoyed it.
Thank you so much to Diane and Stacy for joining me on Reading in the Middle to talk about Roxie in Color. This is a book I think will resonate deeply with readers who have worried about fitting in, being misunderstood, or trying to decide which parts of themselves feel safe to share. Roxie's story is honest and beautifully layered. And Nash may officially be one of my favorite canine narrators in middle grade fiction. Roxie in Color releases June 2nd, so be sure to check it out at your local library, bookstore, or wherever you get your books. And as always, thank you for listening to Reading in the Middle. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share it with the reader in your life, and leave a review. It really helps more people discover the show. You can also follow along for upcoming episodes, author interviews, and middle grade book recommendations. Until next time, keep reading, keep wondering, and keep finding yourself in the pages of a good book.